Okay, so this is the start of the JV Solicitors webinar on tips and tricks when negotiating. Just want to check if I've got all the audience members available. If you're able to hear this, could you please raise your hand? There should be an option there to click. I'll wait for a couple of seconds, otherwise I'll get going. Okay, so this will be a relatively short webinar just about, in general terms, tips and tricks when negotiating. It applies in all areas of law. That's part of resolving matters. Basically, it's an option for both parties to try to come to an agreement that does not involve the extra expense of court or some third-party decision maker, and obviously doesn't involve the added expense of attendance, preparing materials, and continuing arguments that in terms of less relevant matters. So, a bit of housekeeping first. I've got here the minimize and maximize panel. I think it's just down the side of your screen. Any questions you have, there's a questions box. We'll attempt to answer them as we go. Otherwise, we may answer them at the end of the webinar. Okay, so quick disclaimer, as you can see here, this is a general, this is just for general information purposes only. It doesn't constitute advice, so we don't know what your particular matter is, and the individual circumstances of each matter do make quite a difference to what advice we provide. So in any case, this is for your information only. If you want any further advice as to how it applies to you specifically, please, as it says here, contact our office, and it's best to speak to one of our solicitors in person. Okay, so negotiating. As I said, why is it important? I mean, it's an essential part of any sort of dispute. It might be assumed that when you're retaining lawyers, you're going to court and you're wanting to find finality in that using that method. Lawyers are often involved quite a lot in negotiating with each other and on behalf of their clients. I suppose one advantage of having lawyers to do it is they're able to advise you what your interests are, and also they're able to take out a bit of the perhaps some of the more emotional element of negotiations and just get down to practicalities. So as it says here, what is a negotiation? Why might you negotiate? Basically, when you go to court or you're asking a decision maker to make a decision for you, whatever you may think of your case, whatever we may advise, there's always a slightly unknown quantity, and that is the decision maker that you will get. So I mean, some cases are obviously better than others, and parties can receive advice that's more or less well, we can figure out whether it's more or less likely that a matter goes one way or the other. But ultimately, when you're faced with a judge or a tribunal member, and there's a decision that's up to them, it's in their hands, and you have no control about which way they go to decide. The best you can do is provide your evidence, provide your arguments, and then wait for the result. On the other hand, on the negotiation, you have a bit of control over the result. The parties can figure out what terms they want. They know exactly what they're getting themselves into, and you can decide even at the last moment that you don't want to go ahead. So that's what this is called. That's why we've called it here a beneficial compromise, rather than going to court and risking a loss. So it applies in all areas. So here we've listed business transactions, litigation, family law proceedings. I suppose I'm presenting more of a family law background. Negotiations are a big part of family law. Matters very rarely go to a final hearing. And so in terms of property and parenting matters, negotiation plays quite a large part. All right, so we've gone through some of these benefits already. Now, I suppose in each of these, I can go through in each of these areas of law where you may end up negotiating. So in family law, I mentioned it's parenting or property, so it means that, let's say in property matters, it may be that there's still some disagreement as to certain values, or perhaps in certain items in the balance sheet that you've got, you're not exactly sure how to deal with. In a negotiation, you take all those, I guess, and it's possible to take a kind of global view of that and consider compromises which may bring the matter to an end without having to, go into a full forensic investigation of every single tiny asset, which is something that you would probably have to do before a court, before a judge can be satisfied that that a distribution should be made in a certain way. In terms of parenting as well, it's much better where going forward that both parents are in fact changing over and parenting according to terms that they agreed to themselves, rather than something that's imposed by a court, just as a feel, I suppose. And I mean, they're parents; they're not meant to be professional litigants. So there's a bit more satisfaction in knowing that what time is being spent with the children is something that, in the end, even though it's been negotiated by lawyers, has been agreed to by both parties. Now, with the other areas of law, commercial and litigation, again, I suppose in court there's two main matters which might persuade you to negotiate before going all the way to a final hearing, and that one might be your legal costs. Going all the way to a final hearing does incur quite a few costs. I mean, most of them would probably be incurred in preparing your evidence, going to court and representing you in person, retaining barristers, so counsel, extended correspondence with the other side in terms of interrogatories or notices to produce and that sort of thing. And so, I mean, you may want to mitigate your losses in that sense, and that's something that applies to both parties if they're legally represented, by coming to some sort of happy medium. The other reason is obviously something that I've touched on before, and that is that once you good your case may be there's always a chance that it may not go as well as you'd like, and things can go quite a surprising way depending on who you go before. So rather than putting yourself up to that kind of that sort of risk, it's better to try to come to terms which you can see on a piece of paper before you sign them, and that way and advantage to that is that where you start from, you can only really realistically go down from there. I mean, you can try to say one figure and then come back with something that's higher, but it absolutely will not be accepted. All that's likely to do is to inflame the other party and provoke them to go back to court. So aim high with what you think you're most entitled to. Higher than something you think you'd be willing to settle with, but I mean something that's reasonable as well, so as not to put the other side off and think you're not being serious. And that way, you can actually start the negotiations. So, I mean, the other side's going to do this as well. It's usually the case that, quite usually the case that the first offer that's put isn't going to be accepted. So both parties know this. Solicitors are aware of this. So even when another party puts something that you think is quite outrageous, know that, I mean, that assumption is operating. Okay, so tip 2, don't settle on the first offer. This was touched on previously. It's unlikely to happen anyway, especially if both parties are aiming as high as they think they're worth. The question is then what sort of increments you go down on. So one way that you might do that is I guess the simplest way is just go down in value, and you look at maybe the percentages of the full values. So it's not the same if say one party is offering $50,000, the other party is offering $100,000. Then if the party offering $50,000 offers another $10,000, that's another, well, I believe it's another 20% change. Whereas if the party offering $100,000 compromises by $10,000 and ends up offering 90, that's only a 10% change. I mean, those are things to be argued out. Which one's more corrective? Solicitors probably going to be will make their own arguments for it, but I mean that's something to keep in mind. So that's one way to do it. Another way is rather than going straight in terms of dollar figures, it might be advisable to mix up the offer. So if something involves, say a lump sum payment and a transfer of property, which is quite common in family law, then you can change something around that way. I mean, if those can get a little complicated, and I guess some lawyers use that to their advantage to try to confuse the other party to accept something that's not as good for them, but I mean, that varies from case to case. Best to get legal advice for those kind of matters. So tip 3 here: consider the other side's pressures and perspectives. I mean, this is an important one. I mean, again, quite different going into a negotiation as compared to going into a courtroom. When you go into a courtroom, you know your legal arguments, you know your evidentiary arguments. You know all these things too going into negotiation, but I suppose the front you're putting on is less trying to convince the other party that you're right, then showing them that this middle ground is reasonable and will get both parties out to both their benefits. So that's why considering the other side's pressures and perspectives is quite important. So I mean, put yourself in their shoes, see what maybe is really important to them and what maybe they won't budge on, which is less important to you, and conversely as well, you know, what do you think they're just they might be insisting on only for show or only to oppose your perspective, and you know, what matters they may be in fact willing to give up. So that sort of analysis is a useful thing to make sure you have before you go into a negotiation. So here we have tip 4: know when it's time to walk away. Just because a negotiation started doesn't mean that it has to finish on that day. I mean, it's great. People like to hear that once people have shown willingness to negotiate, they try to follow through and find the best deal. But it's just a practical fact that you know, either one or both parties simply can't meet close enough, and there shouldn't be any pressure for you to feel that you have to accept something that's quite a bit worse off for you just because the other side won't agree to it on the day. I mean, for all the benefits of negotiation, you still always have the option of court proceedings. I mean, whatever your matter is, if you think, or if your solicitors advise that perhaps it might be recommended that, or you may wish to try your case before a judge rather than accept something that's patently harmful to you, you should by all means take that choice. So the way to do this is, it's very easy to get caught up in the heat of negotiation when you're there in person. So before you go in with a cool and sober mind, it's good to come up with a list of you know, the highest conditions that you want, the lowest that you'll settle for, and have that as a reference, just to make sure that you're not influenced by emotion rather than reason on the day, and so you know that when you're providing instructions to your solicitor to accept or reject suggestions, you're not you know, responding as a kind of knee-jerk reaction to some proposal by the other side that may feel outrageous to you and even insulting, and or on the other hand, that you may feel that, you know, the other side is trying to pressure you into doing something you don't quite want, and you feel that, and you're starting to feel compelled that that you have to accept, so that the matter doesn't get complicated and doesn't continue being litigated through the courts. Obviously, before that sort of decision is made, if you're with a solicitor, which is always recommended, all those matters will be discussed with you. All right, so last slide, I suppose, how we can help. As I said, I mean, this is all pretty general information, just a bit of an overview as to how negotiation proceeds. If you're self-represented and you're negotiating against a solicitor, I mean that's not a great position to be with, not only because of the legal knowledge that the solicitor is able to offer their client, and regarding their entitlements. It's also by the fact that solicitors are quite experienced in doing these kind of negotiations, and I mean, solicitor appearing against you is going to be appearing in their client's interests. So so you may not be entirely appraised of what kind of deal you're getting on the day. If any of these matters, if you want to discuss this in any matters you have or otherwise, please get in touch with our office. We've got a free first consultation. Visit our website, it's there on the slide. We've got other webinars as well if any other topics may interest you. Otherwise, yeah, thanks for attending, and we hope we get to have you again as an audience. All right, thanks. Bye. So I've stopped here. No one sees your screen.
Done?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I mean,
what do you want to do?
so is that it? I mean, I hope.
Did you record it?
I think so. I mean, well, let's
Oh, it has
stop
stopped.
recording.